And I was going to see myself, bound for an unknown island to seek for buried treasure. So said Jim Hawkins, adolescent protagonist of the novel Treasure Island, which I had devoured as a restless 12-year-old yearning for adventure. Of course, what actually lay ahead for me was 10 more years of sitting in classrooms. Then would come the real world of work and career climbing. My college journalism degree ultimately led to a magazine writing job in Knoxville, Tennessee. This employment brought with it some opportunity for adventure, and I took full advantage. Among the story assignments I snagged were a rafting trip through the Grand Canyon, joining a Montana cattle drive, hiking the mountains of New Zealand, and canoeing Minnesota's remote boundary waters. But these were short-term forays at best. After a week or two, I'd be back at my desk in front of the keyboard, the adventure over, an experience to be written about and then filed away. What I ached for was a deeper, all-out plunge into adventure with no deadlines, no endpoints. My old copy of Treasure Island sat on the bookshelf, taunting me. Then one evening in 1980, I happened to watch a TV show about a treasure hunter named Mel Fisher. He and his ragtag crew of scuba divers had been hunting for sunken Spanish galleons off the Florida Keys for more than a decade. The next morning, I was in my editor's office, proposing a story on Fisher's outfit. I wanted to join them for a stint as one of their divers. My editor simply sighed and said, "Go." 2 weeks later, I was aboard the Virgilona, an old shrimp boat that had been converted into a diving vessel. We were headed to a spot some 40 miles from Fisher's base in Key West. Somewhere out there lay the remains of one of the richest vessels ever to set sail, the galleon Atocha. Bound for Spain, the Atocha sailed out of Havana in September of 1622, right into the jaws of a monster hurricane. Only 5 of the ship's 300 passengers and crew survived. None of her cargo was ever found. That cargo included 50 tons of gold and silver, worth upwards of $600 million. Relying on ancient maps and shipping archives, Fisher had been hunting it for 15 years. His divers were all in their early 20s, like me. Okay, I was in my early 20s at the time. Each diver earned just $10 a day plus room and board. The payoff would be a share of the Atocha's mother lode, if they could find it. The Virgilona's 6-person crew included 3 divers. JC was a former travel agent from Memphis who had drifted down to Key West. John, an artist from Syracuse, joined up after seeing Fisher interviewed on TV. Mike, a Louisiana native, had worked as a diver on offshore oil rigs until he caught treasure fever. We spent most of our pay on beer, he told me. Just being out here looking for treasure, that's the whole story. Our motto is, "Today's the day." What day, I asked. "The day we find the Atocha," all 3 replied. It was mid-morning when we dropped anchor. The turquoise water was so clear I could see the sandy bottom 50 feet below us. JC explained exactly how the dive routine worked. The 4 of us would plunge in and head straight down to the seafloor, directly under the boat. We would then slowly swim out in different directions like spokes on a wheel. Fan the sand as you go and look for unusual shapes, JC said. Zigzag out to around 50 feet from the boat, then head back. We'll surface together, move the boat, and do it again. As we geared up for our first dive, I noticed several dark shapes in the water below us. Reef sharks, Mike said. "They don't bother us," John commented. We did have one guy who was swallowed by a giant grouper. It spit him out and he was okay. But he quit the next day and I heard he went crazy after that. On that note, we plunged into the water. We found nothing on the first few dives except an old car bumper. But on the 4th dive, I noticed something odd. I picked up the object which resembled a thin Oreo cookie. With a jolt, I realized it was an encrusted silver coin. Minutes later, I pulled something long and heavy out of the sand, a 350-year-old Spanish musket. I was so excited I almost swallowed my regulator. "Nice finds, rookie," John said back on the boat. A wave of exultation washed over me. Over the next 6 days, we made over 50 dives. We found several dozen more silver coins, 6 muskets, some pewter cups and plates, and a large emerald. John made the big score on our last dive, a huge, brilliant gold chain. Gold doesn't tarnish or degrade even after centuries on the ocean floor. The heavy gold chain looked dazzling in the sunshine. The find made us all wonder the same thing. Was the Atocha's mother lode nearby? We wouldn't find out on this trip. The next morning, Virgilona was due back in Key West to resupply. And it was already time for me to leave. Just when I was starting to feel like an honest-to-God adventurer rather than a journalist dabbler. And here came what I might call the big twist. "Why don't you stay?" John said. "We can use another diver." Taken aback, I mumbled something about my job. "Quit," JC said. "But all my stuff is in Knoxville," I replied weakly. "Have somebody store it," Mike said. "Well, I've got a girlfriend there." All 3 guys laughed out loud. "There are dozens of girls in Key West," John said. So here I was, given an invitation to charge full bore into adventure, just what I always dreamed of. And I was coming up with lame-ass reasons not to. Then it suddenly hit me like a thunderbolt. I realized that the life I had carved out for myself wasn't half bad. I was getting paid to go on adventures and write about them. The people who read those stories got to share in these adventures. It was my job that even made these journeys possible. And after each one, I had a home base and a workplace to return to. Friends and colleagues there to support me. I had taken all of this for granted. Maybe I only was living out my dreams, but hadn't understood the totality of them. Not until that moment of clarity on the Virgilona. This was a full-on reset of everything I thought I wanted and valued. The next morning, I headed home to Tennessee, and I never looked back. Well, I did look back once. A few years after my stint on the Virgilona, they finally found the Atocha's mother lode. It was a big news story at the time, a haul of treasure worth hundreds of millions. Every diver came away with a $500,000 bonus just for starters. Fisher and his crew were instant celebrities, even appearing on the Today Show. And I could have been along for the ride. Instead, I had spent the intervening years having more adventures, short-term as they might be, writing about them and sharing those experiences with countless readers. And I'd been able to return each time to my home base and its welcoming support system. So thinking about that big inflection point, I asked myself, if I could go back to that moment, knowing what was to come, would I make the same choice? The answer was easy. Yes. Resoundingly yes. And it has been ever since. Oh, I do keep one photo in my phone from that time. It's a picture of me aboard the Virgilona with that magnificent gold chain draped around my neck. I glance at it wistfully every now and then. And I still have my old tattered copy of Treasure Island on the bookshelf. But now, instead of taunting me, I believe it's winking.